Right, okay, guys, this is the 2026 Paper 2 Walking Talking Mock. As you guys know, because I've probably told you, last year I got the 16 mark on the Anglo-Saxon right, so hopefully we get lucky again. But even if I don't predict any question at all correct, please don't worry. The video will be very, very useful, especially the Cold War bit, because I'm going to talk through the technique. I'll do Cold War first, Anglo-Saxon second. First thing to note is paper 2 is an hour and 50 minutes long. That leaves you 55 minutes on the Cold War and 55 minutes on Anglo-Saxons. The invigilator will not tell you when 55 minutes is up, so keep a close eye on the time, and I highly recommend picking one and sticking to it. Don't read both papers. Pick a paper, do it, finish it, do the other paper. Don't read both of them and try and decide what one you want to do. So the Cold War is the one that you probably need to listen to the closest, but obviously I recommend watching the whole thing. First thing to note is this is a knowledge paper. So if knowledge is a problem, it's not just exam technique, your knowledge must be good. So I have 2 videos already up on YouTube on knowledge. Go and watch them first. This is sort of irrelevant unless you know stuff. So you need to learn knowledge for paper 2. Cold War is unique because every question is different. It's not like paper 1 and paper 3. So you need to sort of understand the way each question works. So the first question in the exam paper is explain one consequence. A consequence is a result of something. So if you win a game of football, the consequence is you get 3 points, right? If you get removed from a lesson, the consequence is you get an hour. It comes afterwards. Now, in history, I always like to think of it as a short-term consequence. And what I mean by that is you need to talk about the immediate thing that happens next. So as an example, let's say we're talking about Cuba, and the first thing is the Cuban Revolution, where Castro comes to power. Then the next thing is the Bay of Pigs, when they try to remove Castro. Then the next thing is the Cuban Missile Crisis. A consequence of the revolution is the Bay of Pigs. The consequence of the Bay of Pigs is the Missile Crisis. This is not a consequence of that. So try to think next thing up, okay? So I'm not sure this exactly how this question would be phrased, but Reagan's not come up in a while, so I've decided to predict him. So something about a consequence of Reagan becoming US president. So Ronald Reagan became US president in the 1981. This was after Jimmy Carter, and this was after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Reagan was very harsh on the Soviets. He used very cruel language. He increased military spending, and he sparked what's known as the Second Cold War. So the way you answer this question is both one is worth 4 marks. So consequence 1 is worth 4. Is you state the consequence at the very start. So state the clear consequence, and then you just give a bunch of evidence to back up why it is a consequence. So just a lot of knowledge. It's only a short paragraph. You'll get 4 out of 4 if you get the consequence right. You don't need a ton of knowledge. I've given you quite a lot here because remember, I'm trying to teach you at the same time. So first thing you do is state the consequence. One consequence of Reagan becoming president was the start of the Second Cold War. That is my clear consequence. Now what I need to do is back it up with evidence. So Reagan was harsh towards the Soviet Union. He called them the evil empire. He abandoned the policy of détente. He increased military spending, and this links to the idea of a second Cold War, by $1 trillion. He announced SDI, which was that bizarre space-based missile defense system, which was the idea that you could shoot down nuclear missiles using lasers in space, put pressure on the USSR, alarmed the USSR. So all of that is more than you need for 4 out of 4. I could probably have stopped here and got 4 out of 4 after system, but it's all to do with the Second Cold War. So you list a statistic or a consequence, should I say, and then you give a bunch of knowledge to back it up. Okay. If you haven't remembered Reagan, worth revising him and Gorbachev for the 80s. Second one has been a question before, but not for a while. So I think a lot of us forget it. Explain one consequence of the creation of the Soviet satellite states. So the Soviets didn't want to create an empire because empires are frowned upon. So after World War II, after the defeat of Germany, if you remember the way it works, if you imagine this is Germany here, at the end of World War II, the Soviets attack via the east and the Americans attack via the west. This is known as when the Americans attack at D-Day. What this means is that the Soviets go through countries like Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania. They already sort of control them then. So at the Potsdam meetings, when America is telling the Soviets to have free elections, the Soviets are sort of like, yeah, but why would we bother? We already control them. So the Soviets, as they walk through these eastern countries, they take them over and they turn them into satellite states, which angers America. So my consequence is, the consequence is going to be increased tension between America and the Soviets. And if you get any question before the Cuban Missile Crisis, you could almost always talk about increased tension. So now I'm going to give some facts about why it increased tension, which is what I just said above. So after World War II, Stalin took control of countries like Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia. They became communist one-party states. He promised at Yalta and Potsdam that there would be free elections, but he didn't really give them free elections because, as I said here, he was already there. He could rig them easily. So he went against the agreements. He increased the West sphere. This clearly divided Europe into communist East, that the Russians had taken over, and capitalist West. Britain, France, America had gone through, increasing tensions between the two sides. And I mentioned that Churchill also said this at his Iron Curtain speech. So Churchill's Iron Curtain speech was basically, imagine drawing a big line through Germany. That's like the Iron Curtain. You've got America, Western capitalism, and Russian Soviet communism on the east. So West versus East. So if you've forgotten the satellite states, hopefully that helps. State your consequence, give knowledge. Quite easy to get 8 out of 8 if you do this right. But again, if you don't know what a satellite state is, if you don't know anything about Reagan, you won't do well. Knowledge is everything, all right? I feel pretty confident on this next one that it might come up either this year or next year. So the Berlin Crisis has only come up once in a while. Now, it's called on the specification the First Berlin Crisis. The First Berlin Crisis includes two key elements: the Berlin blockade and the Berlin airlift. So hopefully you remember a bit about this. If not, watch the knowledge video. But let's talk about the exam question. The exam question is called a narrative account, and this is very strong technique. If you've ever had to write an account of something that's happened in school, or if you witness a crime, the police will ask you to write an account. It must be in order and it must be factual. So the other key thing about this question is you really, really carefully need to look at the dates. They are vital. Do not go outside of the dates. So it could be a narrative account like this that has 2 years. It could be a narrative account with just 1 year. So it could be the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it could just say 1962, in which case the start is still in 1962 and the end is still in 1962. Or it could be a question that's like, talk about Soviet-American relations from 45 to 49. And if that's the case, you start in 45, you end in 49. So you do not talk about 44 and 50 in this example. You do not talk about 47 or 50 in this example. So you must stick to the times of the question, okay? They will not mark anything that's not in those years. I like to teach it as 3 paragraphs: start, middle, and end. And what you want to also try and do is link those paragraphs together. So phrases like at the start, this led to, as a result of, they are called link phrases, okay? Connectives, as you will in English. So you want to try and begin with the first thing that happens in that year that's relevant to the question and end with the last thing. So this question's on the Berlin blockade and airlift, the First Berlin Crisis. If it says Berlin Crisis 48, it means the blockade and airlift. So quick reminder before we go through the answer. Here is a lovely map of Germany. Germany is split in 2, west and east. Berlin is in the eastern side, so the Soviets should have it, but they don't. Berlin is also divided up into west and east. The Soviets are annoyed about that. They want all of this to be eastern because it's in their zone. So Stalin decides to blockade. Essentially, he stops road and rail and sea travel from coming in, but you can't stop planes, which we'll talk about, okay? So the beginning of the crisis I'm going to show you connectives and evidence. You basically just tell the story in order, just a factual story, start, middle, end, state facts, link your paragraph together. As long as you do 3 separate things, that's why we recommend 3 separate events, and you go all the way from beginning to end, you will be fine, okay? So let's talk about what happened. So let's just go through knowledge first. I'll also highlight some connectives that I use, all right? So let's start with knowledge. The crisis began in June 48. So I'm not beginning in January because there's nothing in January. So I'm just beginning in the first part of 48. The reason why it began, and you get 2 bullet points to help, is because America and the USSR introduced a new currency into their zone of Germany. This really annoyed the Soviets. It angered Joseph Stalin because he believed that it threatened Soviet influence in Berlin because they created their own currency, okay? Here's a connective. He responded. So I'm showing a connective between what happens here and what happens before. On June 24th, good specific knowledge there, the Berlin blockade begun. What did the Berlin blockade do? It cut road, rail, and canal links into West Berlin. So remember, they blocked the West, not the East. They blocked the American side. Why did they do that? They wanted to force the Western powers to abandon the city because the people would literally starve to death without food, and therefore the Soviets would take it over. Now, something I want to mention here is that I haven't mentioned this here. The bullet points are there to help you, but they are not a necessity, so don't panic. So Trizonia is actually when the US, the UK, and France combine their zone into one. I could say that here, but this answer would still get 8 out of 8 without that bullet point. So in an exam, if you don't like the bullet point, don't panic. It's just something you could use. Now we need to link the blockade to the airlift. So we use a great connective, and you can use these same 3 connectives. At the start, this led to. Begin your second paragraph every time with this led to. So what did America do? They organized the Berlin airlift. Begun on the 26th, same year, and it lasted until May 1949. Now let's give some facts about the Berlin airlift. Planes carried supplies, food, coal, and medicine. Planes landed at its peak every 3 minutes. There was 2.3 million tons total. So the West won. They were able to keep West Berlin supplied. They were able to resist the Soviet pressure and avoid direct military conflict. So in terms of knowledge for this, again, watch the knowledge video, but the blockade is in June. The airlift begins a couple of days later. The airlift is a success. So now I've done my start, I've done my middle, but I've got to end the question. I've got to come to an outcome, finish the story off. And the end of the Berlin crisis is that NATO is created and Germany is split in 2. So here's my connective again. As a result, let's give some facts about the end. Stalin ended it on the 12th of May, 49. It had not succeeded. America won. The USA actually continued the airlift until September of 1949. So the airlift goes till September. The blockade ends in May because they have to keep supplying them for a bit longer. Increased tension, confirmed the split of Germany into West Germany and East Germany, and also led to the formation of NATO. NATO was the Western Defensive Military Alliance. So what have I done? I've said the story of the Berlin crisis. Start, middle, and end. Everything is in order, chronological order, and I've linked them together as a result of this led to, therefore, at the start of, connectives. Okay, so start, middle, end. You only need 3 different areas of knowledge to get 4 marks. You just need to make sure it is in order. You need to make sure you stick within the dates, and you need to make sure that it is factual. So imagine you are writing an account of something you've witnessed. The police has asked you to write a statement. You wouldn't tell it in the wrong order. You wouldn't lie, and you try and use as much detail as you possibly can. All right. Only 1 more question to teach you. That's it. Only 3 different question types. So this question is the hardest one. It is 8 marks, but you choose 2 of them. So you only do 2 of them, which equals 16. Apologies for writing the wrong thing here. I should say arms race. So you're going to get a choice. You get 3 bullet points. Make sure you tick the right box. You tick 1 box here and tick another box on the next page of what questions you are doing. Now, This question is very similar to question 1. You explain why something's important. And important is a bit like a consequence. Why is somebody in your life important to you? Why is a certain teacher important to you? Why is your football team important to you? Why is a singer important to you? It's not just why that singer is good, why your football team is good. It's why are they important? Try and think about what the word important means. In history, we often call it significance. How many people do they affect? Do they matter? Why does it matter? That sounds easy enough. So it is the importance of X. Why is X event important? Why is Truman important? Why is whatever important? Why is whatever important? But here's where it becomes difficult. It's not just why they are important. It's why they are important for a specific reason. So I call it, why is X important for Y? And that could change. The question could be, so I've predicted Truman Doctrine for development of the Cold War. Development of the Cold War means the future. But the Truman Doctrine could be important for tension. It could be important for Western Europe. Could be important for Vietnam and Asia. That won't come up in the Cold War, but you get my point. My idea is that every event must be important for a specific reason, all right? I might be important to you for a different reason than I'm important to a friend of mine or important to my wife. People are important for different reasons. Events are important for different reasons. So the way we answer this is you try to think of 2 different reasons why they are important. So 2 PEEs per question. Okay, 2 separate reasons why they are important. Now, bit tricky, but they could both be the same reason. They could be important because they increase tension. They could be important because they increase tension, but you'd give different knowledge. So let's show you a couple of answers. I've done all 3 for you so you can see the answers. I predicted Truman Doctrine. I predicted it for years and it hasn't come up. I predicted Hungarian uprising. Hasn't come up for a while. So why was the Hungarian uprising important? For the Soviets controlling Eastern Europe. Quite an underrated topic. And why was the arms race important? For the development of the Cold War. So hopefully that explains how to do it. Now I will show you some PEE work. So one reason the Truman Doctrine was important for the development of the Cold War, focusing on importance, was it led to the USA's policy to contain communism. Now I'm going to give some facts about containing communism and why. So World War II, Europe was ruined, therefore communism could spread. Stalin wanted to expand. He said this at the war conferences. Truman knew he had to support the countries that were economically damaged because otherwise they might fall under communism. Because if people have got nothing to live for, nothing to work for, they might as well just be communist. Created tension between both superpowers, and now it developed the Cold War. So a bit of explanation, linking back to the question, which remember is development of the Cold War. A few more facts for you. He announced the Truman Doctrine in a speech. It was on the 12th of March, 1947. He said he would provide 400 million economic aid. Remember, this is just before the Marshall Plan, to help fight against communist rebels. So why is it important for the development of the Cold War? Truman abandoned isolationism and followed containment. Remember, containing Soviet communism means he's not going to take back places like Hungary and Czechoslovakia. But if, let's say, Vietnam tries to go communist, they will try to contain it. So there's one PE on the Truman Doctrine. And you see, I focused on developing the future of the Cold War. Another reason why it developed the Cold War was it increased tension. Could also speak about the Marshall Plan here, by the way, but as well. So it increased tension. It developed the Cold War because it increased tension between them. Why did it increase tension? He didn't like communism. He called it the will of the minority being forced upon the majority, saying that the people have no freedom. He said capitalism was good, communism was evil. He confirmed the division between superpowers, whereas previously they were allies beforehand. They are now direct opponents. You could argue Truman Doctrine began the Cold War. It led to the Marshall Plan, the provision of 12 billion in aid to European countries. I think in total it was actually 13 billion. As a result, they set up Cominform and Comincon, Stalin did, to strengthen it. So again, go back to the importance. It's important for the development because it didn't just set the US position, but it divided the USA and USSR as superpowers. So I've got lots of knowledge, but I've made sure I've spoke about the development of the Cold War, all right? Because that's what the question is about for this time. You can obviously read this in your own time, so I'll flick through it. You can pause it, and again, you can get some more knowledge elsewhere. So second question is on the Hungarian uprising. So the Hungarian uprising was in 1956, and it was where the Hungarians were unhappy because they thought they might get a bit of freedom because Stalin had died, Khrushchev had taken over, Khrushchev had announced de-Stalinization. The Hungarians thought they might get some freedom. Imre Nagy was made prime minister, but he threatened to leave the Warsaw Pact. And long story short, the Soviets invaded, crushed him, killed Nagy. So why was that invasion or uprising, why was it important for how the Soviets controlled Eastern Europe? So let's focus on that. So one reason it was important was because it proved to the rest of the world that the USSR would use military force to maintain its power. Let's give some evidence. It was 1956. Hungarians were protesting against Soviet control, no freedoms. They wanted reforms. They also said they were going to leave the Warsaw Pact. Khrushchev then sent in 200,000 Soviet troops, 2,500 Hungarians were killed, and the uprising was defeated. So lots of good specific knowledge. But now I need to make sure I link that knowledge to Soviet control. It sends a clear message to other Eastern European countries that any attempt to break away from Soviet influence would be met with brutal force, meaning the USSR could keep control through fear. So the Hungarian uprising matters because they crushed it, and this increased their control. Okay. Another reason why it increased their control was because America did not get involved. This proved that the West would not help in the East because of containment. So again, I'm proving that it helped for Soviet control. So although the USA condemned it and said it was bad, they didn't intervene. Because of containment, they would only help countries that were not already communist. The West was not going to go to war over the USSR. This is important because what does it do? If you live in Eastern Europe, you think, well, crap, we can't do anything now because America's not going to help us if we try and reform. So it proved the Soviets could act harshly within their sphere of influence, help them maintain tighter control, and therefore increased Soviet control of Eastern Europe. So hopefully you can see how I'm linking it back to the question. And last question I've done on the Cold War, then that's it. Just 3 questions, is why was the arms race, so that's the military spending in the 40s and 50s, important for the development of the Cold War? It was important because it increased tension. Same again, give some facts. The USA developed the atomic bomb. The USSR followed in 1949. Then they made hydrogen bombs. The USA had a hydrogen bomb in 52. The Soviets had a hydrogen bomb in 53. Meant both sides were trying to outdo one another. Why is that important for the development? Because it increased tension. It escalates the Cold War, worsens divisions between the two sides. So the arms race is important because it makes tension higher. Another reason arms race was important was because it led to the policy of MAD, mutually assured destruction. This is the idea, so knowledge of what MAD is, that if either side attacked each other, there would be full-out nuclear war because the other side could retaliate immediately. This would guarantee the destruction of both sides. So more knowledge on the arms race. By 57, they both have ICBMs. These ICBMs can be delivered across continents. Why does that link to the development of the Cold War? Because it means that neither side will be willing to risk war. Hence, the two sides never go to war. Leads to the Cold War as a long-term conflict, all about tension and proxy wars, which means they fight other countries like Afghanistan or Vietnam, rather than a direct war between America and the Soviets. Tricky question. Only time this question comes up is paper 3. The Cold War is difficult. A lot of people think it's difficult because of knowledge, but it's also difficult because you've never done a question like this before, never done this before, and never done this before. So make sure you go back through this video. Once you've got knowledge good, make sure you go back through it and check your technique. Now, good thing about the other paper, moving on for the last 15 minutes or so to the Anglo-Saxons, is that this is the exact same as medicine. Technique is identical, so you should feel very comfortable. And really, you're watching this partly to see if I guess anything now, because your technique should be good, because you've already watched the medicine video before your medicine exam and you understand how to do this. So first question is just like medicine in World War I is a feature question. So you know how we do this by now. 2 marks each. You do a feature, and then you give a specific fact to back up your feature. I predicted a question on the rebellions. There are 3 rebellions, Edward and Morcar and Edgar the Atheling, rebellions in the north, and then the really random one at Ely, the island, with Hereward the Wake. So I thought I'd throw that as a feature, because if it does come up, who knows, at least you've got a fact about it. So one feature was it was led by Hereward the Wake and took place in East Anglia. That's my feature. Now I need my fact. Surrounded by difficult terrain, hard for William's army to attack, and allowed the rebels to hold out for some time before they lost. So feature, led by Hereward the Wake in East Anglia. Fact, difficult terrain, difficult to attack. Much nicer question here. One feature of the role of the Witan. So remember, if the king dies, the Witan would pick the new king, and the Witan was full of important people who would advise the Anglo-Saxon king. So feature of the Witan, advise the king on important decisions. Feature, and now facts. It was made up of powerful earls and bishops who could influence key matters, choose the next king if there was no heir. Feature, fact. Feature, fact, just like medicine. This is a total random guess. If I had to guess other questions, I think legal system could come up, like Wergild and stuff, blood feud. So maybe check your Witan, rebellions, legal systems, Anglo-Saxon government, that kind of thing. Basically, knowledge video will predict this. Right, let's get to the 12 marker. Just have a feeling I've predicted this year it's going to be a 12 marker on the succession crisis after the death of King William. Many of you know about the first succession crisis when Edward the Confessor dies, and you got Harold Hardrada, William of Normandy, Harold Godwinson, but we sometimes ignore the end of the course about the succession crisis. So why was there a disputed succession after King William dies in 1087? So this is just like medicine, yeah? This is the exact same as before. You are ideally going to do 3 PEEs, which equals 3 different reasons why. So 3 different reasons why that William, or there was a succession crisis after the death of William. I've actually already given you my 3 reasons here, so you can see it. So for this question, again, you get 2 bullet points to help. I'm going to do a paragraph about one reason why. It was because he had 3 sons. Another reason why about his eldest, Robert. And another reason why it was because there was a rebellion in 1088 that could have caused further succession. And if you don't know why, you'll see my points here. So remember, when William dies, he's got 3 sons: Robert, who he doesn't get on with, his eldest; William, who he likes, his middle child; and Henry, who is the youngest, he doesn't really care for that much. But the sons don't like each other particularly, especially Robert does not get on with his other 2. So that's why there's a disputed succession. So normal PEE structure. One reason why was because the division of his lands between his sons. Give some facts for the evidence. So when William left, William gave Normandy to Robert, his eldest son. He gave England to William Rufus, and his youngest son, Henry, got 5,000 in silver and no land. Good facts. Some more facts. Robert was the eldest son. He thinks he should have inherited all of William's land because that's what usually happens. The eldest child usually takes all the land. Why does that lead to a succession crisis? Because created rivalry between the brothers. Both of them had strong claims, especially Robert and William Rufus. Both of them were backed. There was a direct dispute over England because Robert believed he should have it as the eldest child. Therefore, the division of William land, because he could have just given it to one person, because he gave both of them land. That meant there was clear competition, which directly caused the succession crisis. So paragraph 1 is going to be on how he gave land or money to 3 of his sons. Paragraph 2, I'm going to focus on Robert specifically. So quite an important paragraph. If you don't know much about Robert, make sure you know William's eldest he doesn't get on with. So I have put about Robert. So Robert was the Duke of Normandy. He had experience ruling. He'd already fought against his father. Some of you might remember this. He knocked his dad off his horse. That meant the relationship was already poor. The relationship was also poor between Robert and William Rufus. Remember, whenever I say William Rufus, I mean William II, so William's middle child. Annoyingly, he called his middle child William as well, which is great. Some of you might remember this weird incident where Rufus and Henry, the youngest and middle child, poured urine over Robert. Very strange, I know. From an upper floor. This humiliated him, led to a violent argument. Why does this lead to a disputed succession? Well, because they don't get on. So when William dies, immediately, William Rufus was crowned king, as we know. Sorry, it should still be evidence, actually. William was crowned king. Lanfranc backed William, strengthened his claim. However, Robert still thought as the eldest child he should have both, and some Normans agreed with him. Why is this important? Because it meant that William Rufus was immediately under threat. There was immediate conflict. There was no smooth succession. If there was just one son, it's easy and smooth. Because there's 2 that both have land, it's not going to be smooth. Robert's got his own army from Normandy. Robert's got nobles that back him. So William Rufus has to immediately be under threat from the eldest. Robert's challenge to William meant the succession was disputed rather than accepted. And my last paragraph is going to be on the rebellion of 1088. Some of the Norman nobles, including Bishop Odo, they back Robert to do something. So some people have land in England and Normandy, and therefore they had to choose between Robert and William. Some people, such as Bishop Odo, who was quite a big part at the end of the course, William's half-brother, he supported Robert, and he told Robert, you should attack England. Robert said to Odo, well, you do it first. If you win, I'll come and join you. So Odo attacks William Rufus in 1088 to try and overthrow him. He manages to take over such castles like Rochester, which shows it was a big rebellion. Although he's not successful, the question is not whether it's successful, it's why does this lead to a disputed succession? The very fact he's attacking, even though he loses, shows there is not full support for William Rufus. It shows that the nobility are divided. It shows there's instability because Robert and Odo want his land. And because there was Norman nobles who held land in both England and Normandy, they wanted just one king. And this meant they actively challenged William. So quite a tough question. I've tried to pick tough questions here, remember, try and help you. Try to think about why there was a disputed succession, not just after Edward the Confessor died, but after William himself died, because the end of the course goes right up to 1088 when Odo loses. Right, 16 markers. I got this one right last year, so unlikely I get it again, but who the hell knows? I think the church might come up at some point soon. It's quite a difficult question. It is a very difficult question, which is why I'm doing it. So when the Normans take control, they cannot change the church straight away. The reason why they can't is because everybody is religious. They have to almost lie and change the church gradually. So they accuse the England archbishops and church figures as being corrupt, and therefore they can almost take it over the nice way. So exactly the same as medicine. You get a choice of a 16 marker. Exactly the same as medicine. You don't sit on the fence. You don't fully disagree. You don't fully agree. You either strongly agree to a good extent, or you don't really agree, therefore you partially agree. I agree to a limited extent. If you agree, you're here. If you disagree, you're here, right? And the way you plan it, you always have to have one agree and one disagree. And then your third point can either be another agree or another disagree. It doesn't matter where it is. So this question is, of all the changes the Normans made, the most important was the changes to the church. So my agree paragraph has to be, yes, the Normans changed church. So let's think about what other things the Normans changed. They changed land. They changed the government. They changed the size of the earls. They changed the language. They changed the forest laws. They changed the church, as we said. Most Anglo-Saxon people or jobs went to Normans. So I'm going to have a think about everything, and I'm going to do a paragraph on land. So I disagree. One of the reasons that could be more important was the church. And I'm also going to talk about Anglo-Saxon government being changed. Now I've got to decide, do I strongly agree, therefore I agree, or do I only partly and disagree? I've got to try and link this. I'm going to argue in this essay that you're about to read that the church is the biggest change. And why is the church the biggest change? Why is it more important than these two? I'm going to argue it's because the church is so powerful that if you change the church, that's the most important thing you can do because of how religious everyone is. So I agree to a strong extent. So I agree, remember, the most important change was the church. Why? Strength of Norman control. However, was not the only important change because there was also government and land ownership. So there's my paragraph 1. It's going to be the church. 2, government. 3, land. I'm saying what I'm going to talk about, and I've got to stick to this answer throughout the essay. So if you need a bit of knowledge on the church, you should have already watched the video on knowledge, but there's a bit more here. So I agree church was the most important. So when William took over, he replaced some Anglo-Saxon church leaders with Norman ones, including removing the Archbishop of Canterbury Stigand and replacing him with Lanfranc in 1070. How can you replace the Archbishop of Canterbury? Well, what you do is you include them, or remember you say he was corrupt. So he included him of simony, which means church positions were bought and sold. He said he was corrupt because of nepotism, where he gave jobs to his mates and friends. So this meant that the English church or Anglo-Saxon church leaders were seen as unqualified or disloyal. So William almost said, I'm being the good guy here, guys. I'm helping you by changing the church. He was also lucky because the Pope backed him and he increased his power over the church, specifically as well, by making sure that he controlled who he appointed, not the Pope. And the Pope was happy with this because the Pope backed William. Why is that important? It's important because the church was very influential. The church, by controlling it, meant William was able to strengthen his authority again across the whole country. So I agree, changes to the church were the most important, as William was able to consolidate his control and influence everyone. However, I don't believe that's the only reason. I don't fully agree. I strongly agree. So one reason I do not fully agree is that changes to the government were also very important. So what did he do to the government? He reduced the role of the earls. Remember, he made their land smaller. This increased his own authority. He introduced important officials, such as sheriffs, to control areas, to collect taxes. He reduced the power of the earls significantly. Their power was limited because they used to control these big, large earldoms, but William made them smaller. This put more power in the hands of the king, reducing the risk of rebellion, strengthening William's control. He ordered the Domesday Book in 1086, which told him exactly where everyone lived and exactly how many resources he should get. Why is this important? It made government more efficient. He could easily maintain control. He could easily raise money. The Domesday Book told him how many soldiers he would have, how much tax he should make. So really positive changes for William. However, personally, I don't think it is more important. So look here, I do not think it was more important than changes to the church, as the church had a greater influence over people's beliefs than the government did. So if I could control one thing, I think the church increases his authority more than the government. So at the end of this paragraph, for those top grade 9s, we're going to compare why is our most important reason more important than our other reasons. Yeah, that comparative analysis. Same again. My third reason is going to be it was land ownership. So what did he do to land ownership? He replaced almost all the Anglo-Saxon landowners with Normans. How did he do this? He gave land to his followers in return for loyalty through the feudal system. So remember the feudal system, that triangle, king at the top, tenants in chief below, knights below, peasants at the bottom, and everyone sort of got what they wanted except the peasants. Again, revise it on knowledge if you're not sure. William also changed the land. By 1086, 90% of land was Normans. He also introduced forest laws. This made large areas of land part of the royal forest, and the royal forest only the king could hunt. There were harsh punishments if you broke the laws. Why is this important? It helped William maintain control of England and reduce the risk of rebellions. However, I do not think this was more important than the church, as although it secured control amongst nobility, church influences everyone. So can you see my comparison there? Changing land ownership helps him control landowners, but changing religion helps him to control everyone. Then we just repeat our answer. In conclusion, I still agree to a strong extent. It was changes to the church. Although he made changes to government and land ownership, and although they were important, the church was the most important one, as it had a wider impact, influenced everybody. Therefore, I agree that the changes to the church were the most important. So if you've forgotten your structure for this since medicine, hopefully you haven't, but you can see it there. Intro, state your opinion, your argument, do not change it. 3 PEs, but they must either agree or disagree, and then conclude at the end where you repeat the same answer throughout. Just like medicine, little quick tip that I mentioned on the medicine video, the first bullet point is always going to link to something to help you agree with the question. Second bullet point is always going to help you disagree with the question. So if in doubt, use that to agree, use that to disagree. Although I'm not writing this essay, you don't want to read another one. Let's plan it just in case it comes up. So let's say something comes up, like the reason William was able to establish control over England when he took over was because the earls submitted. So the earls in England submitted, meaning they accepted William as ruler. William actually marched to London. He built castles as he marched. He didn't go straight to London. He went around it, built castles. He took over the royal treasury, which enabled him to pay his followers. So it's a control question. I agree. The number one reason why he was able to get control was because the earls submitted to him. Think about what else he does for control. So he builds castles for control. He builds marcher earldoms for control. He rewards his followers by giving them land. Some of you might be saying, what about the harrying of the North? But the harrying was in 69, and this question's in 66 and 67. So I'm going to go for the second reason why he controlled was castles, and I'm going to combine rewarding land and marcher earldoms. Another reason why he could control was land. Last time I agreed, this time I would disagree, and I would argue that castles were more important than submission of the earls. And the reason why I would say that is I would say that the castles scared the earls, and they are the reason why they submitted. I think you could also say that there were no strong earls, and that's why they submitted, because they were scared of the castles. Think about it, Edwin Morgar, Edgar the Atheling. They are not particularly strong. So that is my final Norman bit. Very, very last bit again. Same as before, remember, the Anglo-Saxon paper is easier in terms of question types because you've done it before. Cold War is more difficult because they're new. It is a knowledge paper. So please, please go and watch the knowledge videos over and over again. Hour and 50 minutes, 55 minutes on each. make sure you choose one the second you walk into your exam. Don't spend 5 minutes picking one. If you want to do the essays first, get Anglo-Saxon out of the way first. If you want to just get the Cold War out of the way, get it over and done with, do the Cold War first. Good luck. Let's hope I get some predictions right again.